She'd paid good money for those headphones, but when a furious HOA member smashed them, Sarah knew she was in for a world of trouble. Little did she know, the war over noise complaints was just beginning, and the stakes were about to get deadly. Sarah clicked the lock on her front door, sighing deeply as she made her way down the porch steps. Another day, another tense interaction with the HOA. She knew her music was loud, but did they really have to be so aggressive about it? As she headed to her car, movement in the corner of her eye made her pause. A figure was storming across the neatly manicured lawn, face twisted in rage. Before Sarah could react, the stranger had reached her and was shoving something into her hands. "These are yours, right?" the man snarled, his voice trembling with fury. "You better keep that noise down or I'll—" "Whoa, hold on." Sarah held up a hand, finally getting a good look at the mangled remains of her favorite pair of noise-canceling headphones. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The man's eyes narrowed to slits. "I'm putting an end to your little sonic terrorism campaign, that's what. This neighborhood has had enough of your selfish behavior." Sarah felt her own temper flare. Selfish. I'm just trying to enjoy some music in my own home. You had no right to destroy my property. Oh, I had every right. The man jabbed a finger in her direction. As a member of the HOA board, I'm responsible for enforcing the noise ordinance. And you, Missy, are in flagrant violation. Sarah's jaw dropped. The HOA board? Are you kidding me? She glanced around, half expecting the rest of the neighborhood to materialize, pitchforks in hand. This is ridiculous. I'm going to file a complaint. Good luck with that. The man let out a harsh laugh. Nobody's going to take your side. Around here, we look after our own. With that, he turned on his heel and stalked back across the lawn, leaving Sarah standing there, headphones crushed in her hands. Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't just some random act of vandalism. It was a coordinated effort by the HOA to silence her. Well, she wasn't going down without a fight. Gripping the broken headphones tightly, Sarah made her way to her car, determination burning in her chest. She had a call to make. Sarah's fingers trembled as she dialed the number for her lawyer. It rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered. "Hello. Greg, it's Sarah. I need your help." "What's going on?" There was a note of concern in Greg's voice. Sarah took a deep breath, recounting the confrontation with the HOA board member. "He smashed my headphones, Greg. Just walked right up and destroyed them. And he threatened me, said the whole neighborhood is against me." "Whoa, slow down." Greg's tone shifted to one of calm authority. "Start from the beginning. What exactly happened?" Sarah explained everything, the words spilling out in a rush. When she finished, there was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Okay, this is serious." Greg's voice was grave. "Destruction of property, harassment, abuse of power. The HOA is way out of line here." "I knew it." Sarah felt a surge of vindication. "So what do I do?" "First, file a police report. Get an official record of the incident. Then, we'll start building a case against the HOA." "A case?" Sarah's heart raced. "You mean I'm going to sue them?" "Damn right you are." Greg's response was firm. "This isn't just about the headphones. It's about your rights as a homeowner. The HOA can't just bully you like this." Sarah felt a mixture of trepidation and determination. "All right, let's do it. I'm not going to let them get away with this." "Good." She could hear the smile in Greg's voice. "I'll get the paperwork started. In the meantime, keep your head down and don't provoke them further. This is going to get ugly." Sarah nodded, even though Greg couldn't see her. "Understood. I'll talk to you soon." As she ended the call, Sarah glanced down at the crushed headphones in her hand. This was war, and she was about to bring the full force of the law down on the HOA. They had no idea what they were up against. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal paperwork and tense neighborhood interactions. Sarah filed the police report, as Greg had advised, but the HOA board member who had destroyed her headphones seemed utterly unconcerned. "It's your word against mine," he sneered when Sarah confronted him. "And around here, the board's word carries a lot more weight." Sarah gritted her teeth, resisting the urge to shove the man. "We'll see about that." True to his word, Greg wasted no time in drafting the lawsuit. The charges were extensive: destruction of property, harassment, abuse of power, and violation of Sarah's rights as a homeowner. It was a bold move, but Sarah was determined to see it through. As the legal wheels began to turn, the tension in the neighborhood escalated. Neighbors who had once been friendly now cast wary glances in Sarah's direction, whispering behind her back. The HOA board member who had attacked her seemed to take a perverse delight in the situation, making snide comments whenever their paths crossed. "Can't you just keep it down and play nice?" he would say, shaking his head in mock sympathy. "This whole mess could have been avoided if you just followed the rules." Sarah's blood boiled, but she forced herself to bite her tongue. Greg had warned her that any further confrontations could undermine her case, so she held her head high, refusing to be cowed by the neighborhood's hostility. One day, as Sarah was leaving for work, she noticed a group of her neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, engaged in an animated discussion. As she approached, the conversation abruptly ceased, and they turned to stare at her with a mix of suspicion and disdain. "Morning, folks," Sarah called out cautiously, trying to maintain a cheerful tone. The response was a stony silence. One woman, a stern-faced retiree named Mrs. Wilkins, stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. "We've been talking, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "And we think it's time you reconsidered this lawsuit of yours." Sarah felt her heart racing, but she refused to back down. "I'm not dropping the case, Mrs. Wilkins. The HOA crossed a line, and I intend to hold them accountable." "Oh, we understand that." Mrs. Wilkins raised a hand, silencing the murmurs of agreement from the others. "But you have to understand, this is our community, and we look after our own." The implied threat hung in the air, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew in that moment that the neighborhood war had just escalated to a whole new level. Sarah's hands trembled as she unlocked the front door and stepped inside her home. The confrontation with the neighbors had left her shaken, but she refused to let them intimidate her. As she made her way to the kitchen, the sound of the phone ringing startled her. Steeling herself, she picked up the receiver. "Hello. Sarah, it's Greg. We need to talk." The urgency in her lawyer's voice sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. "What is it? What's wrong?" "It's the lawsuit," Greg replied, his tone grave. "The HOA is fighting back hard. They've filed a countersuit for noise disturbance and community disruption." Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. "What? How is that even possible?" "They're claiming your loud music is a breach of the HOA bylaws, and that your lawsuit is causing undue stress and division in the neighborhood." Greg paused, a sigh escaping his lips. "Basically, they're trying to paint you as the problem, not the other way around." Sarah felt her heart racing. "But that's not true. They're the ones who destroyed my property and threatened me." I know. Greg's voice was soothing, but there was an underlying note of concern. "The problem is, they have the backing of the entire HOA board, and a lot of the neighbors seem to be on their side." Sarah's mind flashed back to the confrontation on the sidewalk, the cold stares, and accusatory words. "They're all against me, aren't they?" "I'm afraid so." Greg's response was laced with regret. "This isn't going to be an easy fight, Sarah. The HOA has deep pockets and a lot of influence in the community." Sarah felt a surge of determination. "Then we'll just have to fight harder." "I'm not backing down, Greg. Not after what they did." "I admire your spirit, but you need to be realistic." Greg's voice was firm. This could get really messy, both legally and socially. Are you sure you're prepared for that? Sarah didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I'm in this for the long haul. No matter what they throw at me, I'm not going to let the HOA win. All right then. Greg's tone shifted, a hint of pride creeping in. Let's get to work. This is going to be one hell of a battle. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The HOA may have the neighborhood on their side, but she had the law, and her own unwavering determination, on hers. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers and neighborhood tensions. Sarah's lawsuit against the HOA had sparked a bitter feud, with both sides digging in for a drawn-out fight. The HOA's countersuit for noise disturbance and community destruction quickly gained traction, with a growing number of neighbors lining up to testify against Sarah. Neighbors she had once considered friends now avoided her, casting wary glances in her direction whenever their paths crossed. "It's nothing personal, dear," Mrs. Wilkins told her one day, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "We just want what's best for the community, you understand." Sarah bit her tongue, resisting the urge to lash out. She knew that any further confrontations could undermine her legal case, so she forced herself to remain calm and composed. In the courtroom, the battle raged on. Greg, Sarah's lawyer, fought tooth and nail to refute the HOA's claims, presenting evidence of the board members' vandalism and the neighborhood's systematic harassment. But the HOA's attorneys were relentless, painting Sarah as a disruptive outsider who cared little for the community's well-being. "This isn't just about a pair of headphones," one of the HOA's lawyers argued passionately. "It's about preserving the peace and harmony of our neighborhood. Mrs. Ackerman's refusal to cooperate has only served to tear us apart." Sarah watched helplessly as the judge's expression grew more and more pensive. She could see the doubt creeping into his eyes, and her heart sank. The HOA was winning the public relations battle, painting her as the villain in the eyes of the court. As the trial dragged on, the strain began to take its toll on Sarah. She found herself jumpy and on edge, flinching at every hostile glance from her neighbors. The once vibrant community she had loved had been transformed into a hostile, judgment-filled landscape. One night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, a thought occurred to her. What if the HOA was right? What if her fight was, in fact, tearing the community apart? The weight of that realization was crushing, and Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Perhaps it was time to consider a different approach, one that prioritized the well-being of the neighborhood over her own personal grievances. With a heavy heart, she reached for the phone, determined to have a hard conversation with Greg. Greg listened intently as Sarah outlined her concerns, his brow furrowing with each passing moment. "Sarah, are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "After everything the HOA has done, you're thinking of backing down." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know, Greg. The more I think about it, the more I realize that this isn't just about me anymore. The whole neighborhood is being torn apart because of this lawsuit." "But that's not your fault," Greg protested. "The HOA is the one who escalated this, not you. They're the ones who crossed a line." I know. Sarah's voice was weary. "But maybe there's a way to resolve this without further conflict. Maybe I can find a compromise." Greg was silent for a long moment, and Sarah could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "All right, let's think this through," he finally said. "What kind of compromise are you considering?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Well, I was thinking maybe I could agree to keep the noise down, as long as the HOA agrees to replace my headphones and issue a formal apology." Greg was quiet for a moment. "That's actually not a bad idea. It would allow you to save face while also restoring some peace to the neighborhood." "Exactly." Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite within her. "And if they refuse, we can always go back to the lawsuit. But maybe this way, we can find a solution that works for everyone." "Okay, I'll run this by the HOA's lawyers, Greg said. No promises, but it's worth a shot. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. It was a risk, she knew, but maybe, just maybe, it would be the key to ending this feud once and for all. The next few days were a tense waiting game as Greg negotiated with the HOA's legal team. Sarah found herself alternating between hope and dread, unsure of whether her proposed compromise would be accepted. Finally, the call came. Greg's voice was terse, but there was a hint of triumph in his tone. "They've agreed to your terms," he announced. "The HOA is going to replace your headphones and issue a formal apology." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. That's great news, and they're really going to do it." "They don't have much choice," Gray explained. "The evidence we've compiled is just too damning. They know they're on shaky ground, and they're looking for a way to make this go away." Sarah nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "So it's over then? The lawsuit is dropped?" "Not quite." Greg's voice took on a more serious tone. "The HOA has one condition. They want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement." Sarah's brow furrowed. "A non-disclosure agreement? Why?" "They don't want this whole mess to become public," Greg replied. "They're worried it will damage the community's reputation and property values." Sarah considered this for a moment. On one hand, she was tempted to refuse, to let the world know what the HOA had done. But on the other hand, the prospect of peace and a return to normalcy was more appealing than a drawn-out battle. "All right, I'll do it," she said finally, "as long as they hold up their end of the bargain." "Good." Greg's voice was filled with approval. "I'll have the paperwork drawn up. Once it's signed, this whole ordeal will be behind you." As Sarah hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It wasn't the outcome she had initially envisioned, but sometimes compromise was the best path forward. No longer would she have to face the daily hostility of her neighbors or the stress of the lawsuit. With a deep breath, she set her mind to the future. It was time to move on and focus on the things that truly mattered: her music, her home, and her own sense of peace and belonging. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life returned to a semblance of normalcy. The HOA had held up their end of the bargain, replacing her damaged headphones and issuing a formal apology to her and the rest of the neighborhood. The non-disclosure agreement she had signed meant that the details of the dispute remained private, much to the HOA's relief. The community, once embroiled in a bitter feud, gradually shifted its focus back to the everyday concerns of suburban life. Sarah found herself gradually reintegrating into the neighborhood, although a lingering wariness remained. Some of her neighbors still cast the occasional wary glance in her direction, but the outright hostility had dissipated. One day, as Sarah was tending to her garden, Mrs. Wilkins approached her, a hesitant smile on her face. "Sarah," she began, her voice uncharacteristically soft. I wanted to apologize for how I acted during all of this." Sarah blinked, taken aback by the older woman's sudden change in demeanor. "Mrs. Wilkins, No, please." Mrs. Wilkins raised a hand, cutting her off. "I was wrong. We were all wrong to turn against you like that. The HOA, they manipulated us, and we let them." Sarah felt a surge of empathy, her initial tension melting away. "It's okay, Mrs. Wilkins. I understand. We all just want to live in a peaceful community, don't we?" The older woman nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Yes, exactly. And I'm sorry we lost sight of that. I hope you can forgive us." Sarah reached out and gently squeezed Mrs. Wilkins' hand. "Of course I do. We're all in this together after all." As Mrs. Wilkins walked away, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and satisfaction. The battle with the HOA had been a harrowing experience, but in the end, it had brought the community a little closer together. She knew that the scars wouldn't heal overnight, but with time and understanding, the neighborhood could mend the divide and emerge stronger than ever. And that, to Sarah, was the greatest victory of all.